Hi everyone, if you're in the back, if you could please come down. It's a big space and we just wanted to be closer together. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our keynote. My name is Tania. I work with Devex. I edit our coverage of food systems. And in today's keynote, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Cary Fowler, a very distinguished guest. He is the co-winner of last year's World Food Prize and the former US Envoy on Global Food Security. We're going to start with a brief introduction by Rose Souza Richards. She's the Phytosanitary Affairs Manager at ISF. Then we'll move into a presentation by Dr. Fowler, followed by Q&A. So thank you so much, and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Tania, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this session that it has been supported and is very much guided to show to the collaboration and the work that there is on the coordination group Phytosanitary. As we come together during the ISF World Seed Congress, I want to take a moment to reflect on the broader significance of our work and how it connects with the vision of today's distinguished guest. The coordination group Phyto has been working intensely to strengthen the international movement of seed by promoting harmonized, practical and science-based phytosanitary measures. Our work plan focuses on key priorities, such as improving transparency in pest requirements, encouraging risk-based approaches, and supporting the implementation of tools like the ePhyto system. These efforts may appear highly technical, but their impact reaches far beyond regulatory alignment. In reality, what we are doing here is laying the groundwork for something much greater, ensuring that the seeds which sustain our global food systems can move safely, securely, and efficiently across borders. That mission is essential, not only to the seed sector, but for the future of agriculture and food security itself. That brings us to the reason why we are honored to be joined today by Dr. Cary Fowler. Many of you will recognize Dr. Fowler as the visionary behind the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. His leadership in preserving agricultural biodiversity has been instrumental in raising global awareness about the importance of securing the genetic resources that underpin food security and food production. Dr. Fowler's presence with us today is a timely reminder that phytosanitary measures are not an isolated concern. They are a vital piece of the larger food security puzzle. Our ability to prevent larger food security, our ability to prevent the spread of pests and disease through seed while facilitating trade and innovation directly supports the resilience and sustainability of agriculture in every region of the world. In the coordination group, we believe that collaboration, trust, and science-based dialogue are the keys to unlocking progress. These are the values that Dr. Fowler has long embodied in his global work, and we are grateful for the opportunity to hear his perspective. With that, I now would like to hand over to our moderator, Tania, so she can lead us to the next session. Thank you so much.
Dr. Fowler, you have the stage for your presentation.
Well, good afternoon. It's quite a pleasure and an honor to be here with you, with the ISF, and here in Turkey, one of the cradles, one of the origins of global agriculture. So today, I want to talk about the situation of global food security. I'd like to do that in three different parts. First is, what is the state of food security right now? The second, I want to look at some of the headwinds that we face in the future to food security. This is going to be the challenging part of my presentation, both for me to give and probably for you to hear. And then third, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the initiatives that I've personally been involved with, including the one that you see on the screen back there. So today, there are at least 750 million people on Earth who are food insecure. We define that as not having access to sufficient foods to meet basic human needs, 750 million. There are 3 billion people on Earth that cannot afford an adequate diet. And I think most tragically, there are 60 million children under the age of 5 who are physically and cognitively stunted, and are so because of inadequate food intake and, even more importantly, inadequate nutrition in the food that they do have. So as we talk today, I urge you to think about what our world is going to look like and what governments and countries are going to look like if we have a third of the children in many countries in Africa, for instance, who are growing up physically and cognitively stunted. That's not a world we want to live in the future. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides, and some of them have small print on them. I know how that makes everyone in the audience nervous as you struggle to read that small print. And I'm just going to tell you, don't struggle. I'm going to explain it for you, and think of them as landscapes, as photographs. Here's the first one. Now, that's a series of world maps of 15 different nutrients. And what it's showing you is where in the world do we have adequate and inadequate intakes of all those different nutrients. And I'll just tell you that if a country is labeled as green or yellow on those maps, it means that 25 to 50% of the population has inadequate intake of that particular nutrient. And if the color is orange or red, it means 75 to 100% of the population has an inadequate intake. On the positive side, if it's very dark blue, then it's okay. You get the point. There are not many places that are dark blue. So if you look at this slide, what it tells you is we don't just have a problem of food insecurity, we have a problem of nutrition insecurity, and we ought to be thinking about those in the same way. What do we face in the future? And I'll tell you that what I'm about to talk about now is what really worries me late at night. I think we have 6 different headwinds that are facing food security in the future: climate, soil, water, conflict, trade, research, and development. I'd like to say a few words about each of them. Last month, April, was the second hottest April ever recorded on Earth. More interestingly, I think, here's a statistic probably most of you don't follow. It was the 555th consecutive month in which the global average temperature for the month, April in this case, exceeded the 20th century average for that month. 555 consecutive months of what some people would call above average temperatures. This next slide is really interesting, I think. It's showing you South Africa and Peru. And it's a distribution of the average growing season temperatures going back as far as they do go back for these 2 countries. That's in the blue. It's a typical distribution pattern. The average temperature of most of the summers was the longest bar in the middle. But there were some summers, a few summers that were cooler, and there were a few summers that were warmer. Normal bell-shaped curve. What's the red? The red is the projection for the future. So what you're seeing there is that those 2 distributions are separating from each other. And what that really means is that the best years of the future will be as hot or hotter than the worst of the past. Let that sink in. Now, we know that there have been hundreds of studies of the effect of climate, particularly heat, on crops. Here's a depiction of those studies, several hundred of them. And what it's showing you is that as you progress through the century, the studies are showing with greater frequency that there will be a negative hit to productivity because of climate. And then finally are these 2 maps that are really interesting, produced last year by a consortium of climatologists that work on climate modeling for agriculture. On the left is a color-coded map of Africa showing where we expect decreases in productivity for certain crops, and on the right, increases in productivity for certain crops. I'll draw your attention to the map on the left and the fact that on that map, color-coded by crop, blue represents maize. Obviously, we are headed towards some real troubles there. But as bad as some of these projections are, as scary as they are, what worries me is that these projections don't take into account some other factors which may further affect productivity. Top of that list, I think, would be soil. The African Union has said that as much as 50% of its current cropland may be unusable by the year 2050, and that more than 75% of the land is already degraded. So we're seeing a lot of soil loss. It's led Ratan Lal, one of the World Food Prize laureates, to speak of peak soil. And just last month, there was an article in Science giving us the information that 14 to 17% of existing global cropland is affected by toxic metal pollution. And that means that 900 million to 1.4 billion people are living in regions of what they call heightened public health and ecological risk. Next in the parade is water. We know that water globally takes about 70%, or agriculture takes about 70% of global water, freshwater supplies, more in the United States where I come from. 21 of the 37 major aquifers in the world are in a position of being depleted faster than replenishment. Again, last month, there was a remarkable article in the journal Science talking about a permanent hydrological regime change. What does that mean? Well, it means that global soil moisture content is in permanent decline. That's what the article said. And the transfer of moisture out of soils and into the oceans is greater than the excess that we're losing from the melting of Greenland glaciers. And it's so great, in fact, that it has measurably affected the rotation of the Earth on its axis. That shift in weight from transfer of water from soil to oceans. Another article just this month, in fact, in Science Advances, talked about the emerging trans-Eurasian drought train in a warming climate. Then I'll just move on to, well, yeah, here are a couple of slides about soil moisture, and you can see from this some of the moisture deficits and the drought that have been occurring. Next, let's move on to conflict. Food insecurity is a cause of conflict. It's been a cause of conflict for thousands of years. There's wonderful data for ancient China, Mesopotamia, Egypt, showing the correlation between bad cropping years, food insecurity, conflict. Very high correlation. But on the other hand, conflict is a driver of food insecurity, and if you look at where the hungry people are in the world today, 60% of them are living in countries that are experiencing conflict. So without solving the problem of food security, we're not going to solve the problem of conflict in our world. Trade restrictions I'm loath to talk about today, but we know that trade smooths out problems in production. And if we don't have free trade and open trade around the world, we run into a lot of problems, and we run into those problems particularly at the moments when we can't afford to run into those problems, when the world is really in need. And finally, research and development. Our budgets collectively for agricultural research and development have been in decline for decades now, as has our budget for basic scientific research. It's really interesting, too, to me, because if you look at the return on investment from agricultural research, public agricultural research, we're looking at a return on investment that is 10 to 1, sometimes 30 to 1. Frankly, when I talk to government officials, I tell them, this is one of the few things that you could do that would actually be making money for yourselves. and yet we've starved those research budgets. Norman Borlaug, who won the Nobel Prize in 1970, during his Laureate lecture, said, well, the Green Revolution has bought us 30 years of time. That was in 1970. We passed the 30-year mark. And what we haven't done is to commit to any type of long-term initiative similar to Norman Borlaug's. And those initiatives typically take some time. So if we want to meet food demand and food need by 2050, we actually can't wait until 2049. We need to be making those investments now. So I'll just summarize what I've tried to say so far. And that is that agriculture faces an historic combination of challenges. I fancy myself a little bit of an amateur agricultural historian. I have never seen anything like the combination of challenges that agriculture faces now. Any one of those challenges would be really serious, but the combination of them is something that we collectively are not taking seriously enough. Now, some of the data that I've given you, some of the projections may not end up being true. They may be inaccurate. In fact, I suspect some of them are. So we can debate whether what we're facing with climate or soil or water or trade or conflict or R&D, we can debate whether the problem, whether the trends we see, whether the data we have is going to give us, this big of a problem or this big of a problem. We can discuss that, and we should. But here's the point. The trends that ought to be sharply positive are not sharply positive, and I don't think that's debatable. We don't see trends for climate, water, soil, et cetera, being sharply positive, which is really what we would hope. So the difference between the negative trends that we do witness and our need for sharply positive, that's a big difference in the world, and that is going to define agriculture, and it's going to define your business going forward for the next few decades. I think this is the context in which the seed industry operates. The seed industry is right in the middle, right in the center. It's destined, in my view, to be more important. It's essential to addressing the kind of problems that society is facing. And I think the seed industry is going to be under scrutiny and, let's be honest, either going to take the credit or take the blame, however things turn out, even though it's not totally in your control. But this is the life that we all face. So I want to transition to kind of the third part of my talk and tell you about 3 different initiatives I've been involved with. And the first follows on what I've been talking to you about the headwinds, the challenges facing agriculture. So in October, when I was working for the U.S. Department of State, we convened a small meeting of Nobel laureates and World Food Prize laureates to discuss these challenges to global agriculture. And we came out with an open letter that described these challenges and then made the argument that society, our government in the United States, but more broadly, ought to be investing in what we call moonshot R&D, big, bold, aspirational, transformational research in support of food security. To date, 128 Nobel laureates have signed this letter and 26 World Food Prize laureates. So more than 150 Nobel laureates and World Food Prize laureates have come together to endorse this letter. It's the first time that those 2 groups have ever come together, and I think no other initiative has garnered such support from that combination of laureates. We gave a few examples in our open letter of the kinds of things that we thought ought to be pursued. Things like nitrogen-fixing cereals, transformation in photosynthesis, improvement in photosynthesis from C3 to C4, plant architecture, root architecture. We just gave those examples not because we prioritize those specific ones, but to give an idea that we're not talking about either business as usual or improved business as usual, but something quite different and more transformational. If you're interested in this, more than 120 organizations, public sector and private sector, have endorsed this open letter, and you can find it on the website of the World Food Prize Foundation. If your organization wishes to endorse it, I encourage that, of course. The second initiative, which was one I was also quite involved with at the Department of State, was what we call VAX, which was the acronym for the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils. This was based on two beliefs. One is that we do have a problem, particularly in Africa, with soil infertility, soil loss. We needed to address that. And we began to do that through a much larger program of soil mapping and soil modeling so that farmers would know what kind of soil they had to deal with, and governments would know what kind of soil was out there so they would know where and how to prioritize their agricultural activities. And it was also based on the assumption that the African indigenous crops have not reached their potential. Collectively and historically, for reasons of history, those crops have not garnered the kind of research that other crops around the world have, and Africa is probably the only continent on Earth where you can say that the major staple crops are all crops from somewhere else in the world. We've called those crops by a number of names in the past: underutilized, minor, neglected, orphan. All of these names have a slightly negative tinge to them. We call them opportunity crops, and they're opportunity crops because if we just invested a little bit into plant breeding, we think there would be huge returns. One of the big dietary issues, nutrition issues, for example, is iron deficiency. The majority of Africans south of Sahara are iron deficient. Fonio, one particular crop that's among this list of opportunity crops, has 10 times the iron content of maize. So these are crops that are not going to replace the major staples, but they can certainly supplement those crops, and particularly, I think, add to the nutritional security of people. All of these problems that I've mentioned, as well as the two initiatives that I just highlighted, I think all point to the necessity of just getting the basics right. There are many fine and wonderful and good things to do in the agricultural development world. There's a much smaller number that are absolutely strategic and basic. What are the basics? Well, we got to get soil and water and research right. And we also have to get crop adaptation right. And that, of course, is where all of you fit in. There is absolutely nothing more basic to agriculture and your business than plant genetic resources, than the diversity of our agricultural crops. So to wind up, I want to show you a few photographs and talk to you a little bit about something I was involved with for some years. This first picture is just a simple, colorful photograph of beans. I think there are about 40 different beans in the photograph. How many different bean varieties are there in the world? Well, if I had a picture of all the different bean varieties in the world, I would need to show you about 1,000 slides such as this, because there are about 40,000. That gives you some sense of what we're dealing with. some squashes and pumpkins. Shameless advertisement for my wife. These were in a book she wrote about squashes and pumpkins. She writes about the history of some of these varieties and likes to take portraits. You guys have portraits of family members. We have portraits of vegetables. And then last but not least, this is the last picture of where you're going to be tempted to look at the fine print. This is a table showing how much of the global seed collection of different crops are held in different countries. And the countries are Australia, Canada, the US, UK, Ethiopia, Brazil, China, and India. Here's the point, and the crops, sorry, wheat, rice, maize, bean, pea, soybean, potato. Here's the point. You don't see any big numbers on the table. No big numbers. And that means that all of these countries, big, powerful countries, have a small percentage of the existing diversity of their agricultural, of these major agricultural crops. What does that mean? That means we're highly, highly interdependent. That means no country can go it alone. That means we're all in the same boat. So it was really this issue and the fact that most of this diversity is housed in gene banks, seed banks, which is kind of a, for the layperson, a fancy word for freezers, in regular buildings around the world. And when I was the head of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, I had a file on my computer that was a Word file that was named Gene Bank Horror Stories. And this was a file I kept that just gave me stories of problems that had occurred in gene banks around the world, floods and fires and all kinds of things. The real problem was that every time something like this happened, and it was an extinction event, we lost diversity, including unique diversity, including perhaps unique traits that a particular crop species might need in the future, and we lost it forever. It was gone like the dinosaurs. And at a certain point, it just struck me, this is not good enough, because the safety of our most valuable natural resource on Earth was only as safe as a building was safe, and they're subject to all kinds of issues. So I thought, okay, let's have a safety backup, a duplicate, a fail-safe place, an insurance policy to keep this. And we went rather far north to try to do that. That arrow is pointing to an archipelago called Svalbard that's above mainland Norway. You see Norway is down here. It's the farthest north you can fly on a regularly scheduled plane. And it has the advantage of being remote, but also really cold. So if you want to save seed for a long time, you freeze it. When you fly into that area, it looks sort of like this as you're flying in. It's one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And this is how we envisaged it. This would be a seed vault that would be built in the middle of the mountain where it was very cold, about -4, -5 Celsius. It's the coldest part of the mountain. And we wanted that so that even though we were going to freeze the seed to -18, which is what the best seed banks in the world have it as, if the refrigeration equipment failed, the temperature would only gradually rise to -4 or -5. They would still remain frozen, and that would give us, according to our calculation, many months to get the repairman out to fix the equipment. So this was our concept, and that's what it looked like under construction, give you a sense of scale. And this is what it looks like today from the air. If you go through the front door, you're looking down a very long corridor. You have to go through several locked doors. And you'll see a door way down at the end. Once you go through that, you're in what I call a cathedral room, a rather large anteroom. And there are 3 doors inside that, and here's what one of them looks like. And when you see that door, you know that something is going on inside and is really cold. If you open it up, that's what it looks like. Today, we have samples. Each sample is about 400 to 500 seeds of more than 1,100,000 different, what we would call populations, normal people would call varieties. This includes more than 150,000 samples of rice, more than 150,000 samples of wheat. It's the largest collection, living collection of biodiversity anywhere in the world. It operates like a safety deposit box at the bank. Depositors send a duplicate copy of their seeds. The seed vault protects those seeds free of charge. And if anything happens to the original copy, if you will, in the seed bank, they can be returned to the depositor. Nobody else has access to them. I'll show you in the next picture my favorite boxes in the seed vault. And they're these. These are by far the worst looking boxes in the seed vault. They come from the International Center for Agricultural Research in Dry Areas, ICARDA. It's one of the CGIAR centers. It was located outside of Aleppo, Syria. The reason why they're my favorite is that we got those boxes out in an emergency situation just before basically all hell broke loose in Aleppo, Syria during the civil war there. So those boxes came out overland by a truck 2 weeks before the fighting came to the CGIAR center there. So that CGIAR center was a major holder of materials, particularly for wheat and barley and several other important crops. A lot of it collected in this region, a lot of it very much focused on drought and heat tolerance, in other words, of global importance. It would have been a true global humanitarian disaster had that collection been lost. I hope I've given you some reasons to think about the challenges that agriculture faces in the future. I think it's probably an easy sell for this audience to understand that the seed industry is at the middle of meeting those challenges. There are going to be a lot of expectations on you. We need to be talking about this more. We need to be explaining to the people why this industry is so important. We also need to be explaining why we need to be more bold and aspirational in our work, and particularly in supporting basic and scientific research for food security. All of those are great intellectual reasons for why we do what we do. So in closing, I want to give you the other kind of reason for why we do what we do, and that's the reason of the heart. One of the things that happened to me when I was working on the seed vault was that I made, I don't know how many trips up to Svalbard, maybe 30, I don't know. And I've spent a lot of my life there, and I jokingly said to someone that some of my happiest days were down in that tunnel that I showed you. It's a special place. So what I want to do is I want to end with a short audiovisual file. This is a music video about Svalbard. It was written and composed by someone I know and sung by someone I know in Svalbard. And the photographs, the video is taken by a woman I've worked with that did photographs for a book I wrote on Svalbard. It's, is there anyone in the audience that speaks one of the Nordic languages? No. Okay. Well, then there's no one in the audience that's going to understand the words. I'll just tell you, all you need to know, and you will feel it, is that this is a tribute to Svalbard, and it's in a way a love song to Svalbard. And you'll see a small clip with the seed vault in it, so watch out for that. And there's a message that I want to leave you with by Jacques Cousteau at the very end of it, and that'll be the end of my presentation. So on with the show.
Bredbygd dekket av is. Du brøler storm og viskebris. Lille, store Svalbard, du mann. Du løfter og tar meg som ingen andre kan. For jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis vei, dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne, nakne jeg. I snøsludd, redsel, kuling og svart, viser du muskler, holder meg hardt. Du har istapper i skjegget, og du dunker stort og vilt i hjertet mitt, for jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis oss vei, dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne, nakne jeg, for jeg vil lengte gjenbruk store ord, for jeg vil lengte nord dit vi bor. Kullsvart inn i vårhvitt utenpå, men vakrest i natt og vinterblå. Du alt jeg vil ha i en boble av tid. Din lyst, din himmel, uendelig vid. For jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis oss vei. Dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne,
Thank you so much, Dr. Fowler, for that really moving presentation. I get literal and metaphorical chills every time I think about Svalbard. It's really such an honor to learn from you. And one thing I've really learned from you is how the foundation of crop diversity is the foundation of food security. And all of that really starts with seeds. They contain the genetic material to adapt to things like the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And that's what makes the work of all the people here in this room so very important. So I wanted to discuss the role of the seed sector in ensuring food security. We'll also be taking some questions from the audience shortly. So if you have any questions, just think of them, and someone will come around with a microphone in a couple of minutes. My first question for you is, when it comes to crop diversity and seeds, why try to save so many? Why not just select the ones that contain the best traits and only work on protecting those?
Well, that's a question we often get asked. Why not just keep the best? The problem is we don't know which one is the best. And the best changes all the time. So a variety or a trait that might be really useful or considered the best today might be an insect's lunch tomorrow. Things change out in the world, and that's the wonderful thing about evolution that Charles Darwin elucidated in 1859, if we care to learn from that. So, you know, there was a great American conservationist named Aldo Leopold, and he said that the first rule of successful tinkering is to save all the pieces. And I think we're still tinkering, we're still playing with agriculture in a way, and it behooves us to save all the pieces, particularly when it's so easy and cheap to do so, and it's so expensive to lose them.
Definitely. And it's such a huge cost, right? Like, what is the cost of losing this biodiversity? It's probably immeasurable.
Well, it is. I was mentioning a story to somebody earlier today that one of my heroes in this field, a fellow named Jack Harlan, had collected what he described as a hopelessly useless variety of wheat in this country, by the way, back in 1948, I believe, and it was susceptible to all kinds of diseases and pests, and no farmer would ever want to grow it again. But some years later, they discovered that while, yes, it was susceptible to a lot of diseases, it was actually resistant to a whole bunch of new diseases that had come into the fields. And so it was used in plant breeding programs in the United States for wheat, and the net economic impact was something like $150 million to $200 million a year, every year, just for the northern part of the United States and just for that one crop of wheat. 1 or 2 years of somehow appropriating that scale of benefit would be enough to completely finish the endowment of the crop trust and conserve all diversity forever. So what did it cost to conserve that one variety of wheat? I don't know, a couple of dollars a year, maybe. Virtually nothing. But had we not done that, we would have forfeited that benefit. And that's the story of agriculture. It's the story of crop diversity and plant breeding.
Yeah, that's really quite a, return on investment to be preserving all of this genetic diversity. You mentioned some of the dangers that seed banks are facing. You gave the example of Syria and how they almost lost ICARDA during the war. Can you talk about some of the biggest challenges facing seed banks today? And when we're talking about facing the future, the title of this keynote, what are some of the things that can be done to make seed banks more resilient in the face of those challenges?
I lived in the seed bank world for many years, so I'll try to be very brief in answering that question. Obviously, the biggest challenge for seed banks is actually funding. Before the Global Crop Diversity Trust was in existence, there wasn't a single gene bank that I knew of that operated on a secure multi-year budget. And I typically tell people that if you want to conserve crop diversity forever, or put it another way, if you want to conserve it as long as you think that we're going to need agriculture in this world, then conserving the seeds in seed banks is not something you want to do just 49 out of the next 50 years. You want to actually do it 50 out of the next 50 years, and the only way you can do that is with a secure budget. The budget for seed banks is minuscule in the scheme of things globally, but no country is willing to put that kind of funding in place in perpetuity. At least they weren't until the crop trust came along. And it's a great investment to do it that way because long-term funding allows for gene banks to make good, rational decisions about their collections. I do think we need a better global system for conserving crop diversity. There is a lot of, I would say, over-duplication out there. Some gene banks are not well managed. There are a number of different issues, but critically, the big one is funding, and unless you get into a situation like the Jakarta one that we showed in the slides, where a gene bank gets in the middle of shooting, in which case you've really got a problem, particularly if you haven't backed up the seed collection in Svalbard.
That's why it's so important to get everything in there as fast as we can, right? We're here with so many different representatives from the seed sector. What is their role in preserving crop diversity? And is there anything they can be doing more of or differently to further that goal?
Well, the seed industry is the largest and most direct user of the crop diversity in gene banks. It's not the only user. There are a lot of researchers doing basic biological research that will take samples out of the gene banks, but for the most part, the seed industry is the biggest user. I wish it were an even bigger user, and I wish that the seed industry would publicize its use of the gene banks even more to talk about why they're important. I also wish that the seed industry would perhaps put even more demands on the seed banks to say, well, it's great to get your seed. It would be even better if we had better information and data about what is in the seed so we don't have to take, depend on our luck to get what we're looking for. And that would, I think, put pressure on governments to improve the collections. The more information we have about the collections themselves, the better used they will be, the better the variety that the seed industry produces, and the better for the farmer and the consumer. So it all starts with the seed and the information around the seed.
When it comes to Svalbard, how do you see its role changing over time, particularly in light of climate change?
Yeah, I think that, I think climate is the biggest challenge facing agriculture in the future. The collections we have in Svalbard and in the seed banks around the world are the answer to, as far as we in the seed business have answers. The answers are there. They're contained in those collections. You might be asking about the facility itself, and I'll just say that it's been interesting going to meetings and have people say, well, Cary, how is the seed vault going to fare in climate change? Because if you look at global heat maps, you'll see that the Arctic is heating up faster than just about any place else on Earth. So how is the seed vault going to handle that? And I tell people it's going to handle it pretty much the same way the freezer in your kitchen is going to handle it. If the temperature in Svalbard increases, let's say 2 degrees, probably the temperature where you live is going to increase by 2 degrees. So what's going to happen? Well, your freezer is going to cycle on a little bit more frequently than it would otherwise, and it'll keep it at the same frozen temperature, which in this case is -18, and you won't notice the difference. So that's how Svalbard's going to deal with it.
Okay, that's good to know. In the media, and of course as a journalist, I've used this term as well, Svalbard is often portrayed as a doomsday vault. And I know that you don't particularly like this term. Why is that a misnomer?
Well, you know, when I was working, I chaired the committee that assessed the feasibility of establishing the seed vault. I think all of you out there have had exactly the same experience I had in different fields. I wrote a letter signed by people in the CGIAR proposing that Norway look into the feasibility of establishing such a facility. That got me a call from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway saying, we have received this letter from this prestigious group of international research centers. I said, yes. And we want to establish a committee to look into building a seed vault. I said, yeah, but I have to tell you, I actually drafted that letter. And the person on the other end of the phone said, yeah, I know that. I said, well, I don't think I can be on that committee because it's a conflict of interest. I wrote the letter, and the fellow said, do you know the answer to your own question? Is it feasible? I said, no. He said, you're the chair of the committee. So that's kind of how it started. We did not think that anyone in the world would be interested in what we were doing. I mean, frankly, crop diversity, gene banks, it was never in the media. If you talk to someone in the media, they said, well, Cary, this is a boring subject. It's boring, it's not very colorful. So they never covered it until Fred Pierce, a journalist at the New Scientist, wrote an article about it. He used to call me up every year and say, is there anything interesting going on in your field? And that year I said, well, Fred, you know, we are building this safety deposit place up near Svalbard. He said, tell me more. He wrote a small article in the New Scientist, and somebody, I guess it was a headline writer, put on it, the headline was, Doomsday Vault Opens in the Arctic. And all of a sudden the phone was ringing constantly from journalists. So what is this about a doomsday vault? And I have to acknowledge that if some gigantic catastrophe happened, okay, it would be useful, and in that case it's a doomsday vault. But we never really thought of it in that way. What we wanted to do was to protect against the more mundane kind of extinction that takes place. If you're a librarian in a regular library and somebody asks you, have you ever lost a book in this library? If you're honest, you'll say, yes, of course we've lost a book. If you ask the same question to a gene bank manager, have you ever lost a sample? If they're honest, they'll say, yes, we've lost a sample. Well, that's okay if it's a book. You can get another copy. Sample, not so easy. So we wanted to put an end to that kind of drip, drip, drip of extinction, the mundane kind of extinction that sometimes explodes if you have a fire or a flood or a conflict. But we were really looking at a very practical mechanism. Low cost, by the way. We knew that for Svalbard for the seed vault to work, it had to be sustainable, and sustainable meant low cost. So the facility you see up there has no staff on site. There's nobody needs to watch seeds freeze. That's just not what they need. So yeah, it's running as planned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the journalist helped in that case by naming it that. It got some attention.
In fact.
I'm reminded of something you told me last year when I interviewed you, when we spoke when you won the World Food Prize. And I had asked you about the doomsday question, and you said, people don't understand that extinction is a process. It's not an event. Extinction doesn't really happen when the last individual dies. It happens when the species loses the ability to evolve. And what we've tried to do is conserve all the options for the future for our agricultural crops that will enable them to evolve in a rapidly changing world. And I think that just so beautifully encapsulates, everything that you've devoted so much of your career to. I want to ask you a question about innovation, and then we'll open up the floor to a couple of questions for a few minutes. You had showed us the letter that you had organized with more than 150 different Nobel Prize and World Food Prize laureates, in which you called for moonshot technologies, investment in moonshot technologies. When it comes to the seed sector, what might some of those moonshots be?
Yeah, I think that the ones we highlighted in the open letter are really aimed at the seed sector. In fact, in the background materials that we drafted for that meeting of Nobel laureates, I think we identified about 20 things that we thought were moonshots. And the one big criticism I've gotten for the draft that I gave the Nobel laureates was, Cary, all of these seem to really be dealing with crop plants. Isn't there something else that's going on out there other than crops and seeds? And I acknowledge that there is, but most of them, I think most of the moonshots are things that will affect and be in the center of the seed industry in the future. And that's why I think that we all need to be advocating not just for increased public sector involvement in agricultural research, as good and as necessary as that is, but we need to be demanding and trying to convince policymakers and funders of the need for increasing basic research. Many of the technologies that we now use and people would take for granted, even in the seed industry and in plant breeding, didn't start off as technologies that were developed because we wanted to improve breeding techniques. They started off with basic biological and genetic techniques. We need to keep that pipeline going. And people sometimes say, well, why should we be investing in this long-term basic research when there's so many problems in the world? And I give them, an example. Well, look at the development of lasers. How many years ago was that? There were a couple of Nobel laureates that got the prize for inventing lasers. They didn't invent lasers in order to help doctors do cataract surgery, which I had about a month ago. That was basic research, and that's the kind that we need in the biological sciences to support the industry that all of you are in.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions from our audience? Yeah, is there a microphone, maybe? I can give you mine.
Well, the hall is not full, so maybe I could use my own voice. Thank you, Cary, for this. I've got actually two issues, two questions. One is declining R&D expenditures. In the meantime, in the same time that they were declining, the R&D expenditures of these people have climbed tremendously. Mm-hmm. Already in the Netherlands alone, it's some €750 million. That's even more dollars these days, by the way, per year. Trouble is that they are focused on certain types of crops and not the phonios and not the other, how did you call them? Underutilized crops. Opportunity crops, sorry. So the question is how to make those opportunity crops real opportunities. And in a way, the crops that not we anymore, that these companies are dealing with, they are commercial crops because there is a pipeline for them to earn money on. So how do you look at how to create a seed opportunity, not a breeding opportunity, a seed opportunity for the crops like fonio, because then they will pick it up by themselves. On the fundamental side, I fully agree with that. Someone has to do that, and that's public. Let's stick with this one. I'll maybe keep the other one for later.
Yeah, thanks, Niels. I think we all understand now the importance of having a close relationship with government. one in which government understands what we're doing. I think it's fair to say that most governments have an incomplete, I'm being diplomatic, an incomplete understanding of what the seed industry does and the importance of it. I don't think that investment in opportunity crops is something for every seed company on earth, but I think it's something for a few seed companies that have a longer term view and might want to make that type of investment in a different kind of future. But I also think that it's an investment that the governments need to be making. So for example, that's not necessarily public plant breeding, though I think that has a role. It could be things such as committing to buying a particular high nutrition content vegetable for school feeding programs 5 years from now. And then saying we're going to be buying a certain amount of this in a few years. And the farmers will then understand, well, then we need seed for that. So I think there are various ways. If you look at the current cropping systems around the world, you can see a lot of historic incentives that have been there, ones that are very clear, some that are not so obvious, to incentivize production and marketing of certain crops. I think we could, in a climate changing era when we're throwing together different species and things are so uncertain on the farm, we could begin to hedge our bets and broaden out the spectrum of crops that are potential contributors to food and nutrition security. And there's where I think, there's obviously a role for the public and the private sector.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is market day after all.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Cary. I would like to reassure you, ISF signed the moonshot call you send out. But more importantly, besides signing is, and I would like perhaps your presence here also to help us, because at the end we see more and more international bodies discussing this kind of topics, climate change. You have the COP, you have sustainability weeks in FAO, you have FAO speaking, you have food system summit. Everybody's speaking at the end on the same thing. And you have the impression, the more we are speaking, the less we are progressing. That means in your call, or what's your call for somehow, is there a body where we should all go in? Because I must admit, we go everywhere. What's the impact? And perhaps you can give us a little bit of advice with all your experience. And as you are the moon shooter, where should we go with you?
Well, I think the point that you make is why I like the seed industry as much as I do. And it's because it's practical, it's concrete. We get the material out to the farmer, they use it, we see it, we know why it's important, and it's not a lot of blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a huge marketing potential for and by the seed industry to the public, to policymakers, to get the kind of support that the seed industry needs. I don't know myself which one of the 20 or so moonshots that we identified are the ones that would have the best chance for payoff and the most impact. That's really beyond my pay scale, so to speak. What I think we need, and this isn't going to come from me personally, but I think you can play a role in that. I think we need, obviously we don't have governments that have committed to that. Quite the opposite. We're we're just at the beginning of this effort to get governments to take seriously the kind of challenges that we face by 2050. A lot of the projections I gave you for soil and water and such are 2050 projections, and it's really pretty dire. Governments haven't taken that seriously. So there are a lot of different ways that we can try to get governments to take it seriously. I think, for example, we need the different national academies of science in different countries. Every country, almost every country has a national academy to undertake studies of this. We'll be talking to the National Academy in the United States, and there's a World Academy of Science. to do larger reports so we really get the scientific consensus behind that, and then begin, obviously, to socialize this with the different policymakers. But we certainly need the industry on that. If we go without the industry, it's not happening.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. My name is Maaike Groot of East West Seed. I'm the daughter of Simon Groot, World Food Prize Laureate 2019. When my father won that same prize, he dedicated the award money to a pumpkin project in Uganda to promote the hybrid pumpkins in Uganda. And we have since also joined the Devex program. My father turned 90 last October, and he cannot travel anymore either to Des Moines to join the Borlo Dialogue or to the ISF World Seed Congress. But he told me last week, my dream, my final dream is to see 1 million acres of pumpkin in Africa. He sees that as a very important crop to not only bring nutrition, but also economic development for smallholder farmers in Africa. So I would like to ask you, how can we accomplish this? Can we work together to fulfill his dream?
Thanks. My wife would love your father because she wrote a book on pumpkins and squashes. I'll tell her that. I think it's going to take some time, but I think we have to get there with some of these crops, and I'm encouraged. I think frankly, just changing the name of these crops to opportunity crops rather than orphan crops causes people to rethink what they really are and what the potential is. So I'm hoping. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such an optimistic connotation, opportunity versus orphan crop or underutilized or underinvested. So actually, we did have one more question. If we can give the mic over here, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think I want to add on from the last speaker. I'm Mawiji Hubbard. I come from Uganda, and I'm part of the Next Generation Agriculture Impact Network. And I'll start before I came. I'm a farmer myself, and when I used to grow up, my mom never used to take us for pharmaceutical medicine, like pharmacies to buy whatever it was. So we used to have a lot of indigenous plants around, and now I have a new name, opportunity plants around, where you could get them and you now apply and get better for the headaches and what have you. But as I've grown, transitioned into farming, all this is lost. And I was very happy when you said that we are trying to get into, increased production because we have a lot of hybrids, GMO, genetic, to get to productivity. But nutrition-wise, I think we are not making it there. So I want to ask you, how do you strike a balance? Because as a farmer, I'm in a dilemma. Because when we go to the smallholder farmers, we're trying to tell them, you know what? You need to produce these high improved crops because we need to produce. At the end of the day, because of climate change, we are doing it at the expense of the indigenous or the opportunity crops because, they will not give you a lot of value. So how do we strike a balance that we can still have the nutritional content, the other seeds, opportunity seeds preserved, but still, contribute towards production? And the last one, the young farmers would want to play really a role in preserving the seeds. The first question is, you said on the seed bank, the person who deposits the seed is the person who picks the seed. So does this mean these seeds belong to the government or they belong to the individual who deposits the seeds? And I think I'll be excited really because I'm initiating a program where I'm collecting the opportunity crops, and then I'm trying to preserve them myself and then giving it to a few colleagues of mine, the young farmers, to multiply them. Then we'll see how best to preserve them. But I'm really very excited with your presentation. I think we can see what we can do. Thank you.
I'll try to answer the second question first. The seeds that are deposited in Svalbard, most of them have come from government collections or the CGIAR, so they're owned by that institution. They're that institution's seeds. Most of them are in fact covered by the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which has a mechanism for access and benefit sharing for those seeds. That mechanism is an important one for the seed industry, but it's one that really needs to be better worked out and needs to be working well for everyone concerned. We want, I think everyone wants or should want, that the goal of that treaty is actually to maximize use of the seed collections. Why? Because that's where the real value is to society, to farmers, and to consumers. So that's one maybe response to your question. I think going back to the opportunity crops are opportunity crops because of the opportunity to increase production of those crops. They will never be major crops, and they in fact will fall into disuse and oblivion if their productivity level isn't high enough to warrant a place in agricultural systems. So they have to have the place in those farming systems, and I think that place is a place which is all about nutrition. In our process with the VAX program, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, we took a master list of about 300 traditional and indigenous crops in Africa. We narrowed that down. We had a meeting of nutritionists, first of all, to look at what kind of nutritional level those crops had, and which combinations in every region of Africa would be sufficient to supply nutrition 12 months of the year. And we narrowed that list down quite considerably from 300, and then we took that list to a group of climatologists and said, okay, of this list of very highly nutritious crops, which ones are the ones that will survive climate change? If they're not going to be adapted to climate change, then forget it. And through that two-step process, we came out with a list of about 60 African traditional and indigenous crops. I think much more work needs to be done. We haven't by any means said the last word. Much more research should be done, but I think that's the starting point for anyone interested in improving the productivity of those particular crops. I think we could start with that list of 60 and be well served.
Thank you. Yeah, and it just seems like as time goes on, there's more and more awareness that nutrition security is fundamental as well, not just food security, and VAX is so essential for that. Thank you so much, Dr. Fowler. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you and learning from you. I think you've given us all a lot of food for thought for the next couple of days and to continue our work going forward.
Sure.
So
thank you, Tania.
Thank you again.
Thank you.